Welcome back. So in this module, we're going to talk about competitive advantage. Specifically, we're going to define competitive advantage and the differences between cost advantage and differentiation advantage, and then we'll go into a little bit more depth of cost advantage in this module. Now, in a general sense, competitive advantage is when two or more firms compete within the same or an identical market, and one of those firms possesses some sort of a competitive advantage over its rivals or competitors when it earns or has the potential to earn a persistently higher rate of profit. So when you got firms in the same market and one of those firms earns that persistently higher rate of profit, we could say that is competitive advantage. And it should be noted that a firm can of course trade current profit for investment in market share technology, or it may forego profits in the interest of customer satisfaction, philanthropy, employee benefits, or executive perks. So we can define, or we can identify that, yes, sometimes a firm does not necessarily earn a consistent economic profit, at least in the short term, but over the long term, we can define profit in a variety of ways. That ties back into things like corporate social responsibility, doing good for the public, research and investment, etc. So these are kind of different forms of profit. So however you want to define profit, whether you define it extrinsically, i.e., money, or if you want to define it in terms of intrinsic benefits, psychic income, social responsibility benefits, or possibly also research and development advantages, either way, we're talking about earning a persistently higher rate of profit, and that's how we define competitive advantage. And there are two sources of competitive advantage. First of all, you've got cost advantage, and then you've also got differentiation. Now, we would talk about cost advantage as an ability to offer the same or similar product at a lower cost than competitors. So maybe an example. If I am a milk producer, or I own a milk production facility, if my milk costs 5 cents a gallon less than the competitor, then we would say that I have a cost advantage. And we could look at that typically, we talk about cost of production. So my milk costs me 5 cents less per gallon. Now whether I charge a consumer 5 cents less per gallon or not is another story. But at least I'm able to produce at a lower cost. Some of you may be thinking, well, this sounds kind of like some of the stuff in operations management, operations research. Absolutely right. Operations management, operations research, if you have an interest in that, is great for understanding cost advantage. And I've got some other videos on things like Lean Six Sigma if you're interested in more of the tactical side of it. But we're going to talk more about the strategic side of cost advantage in this particular course. Now, you also have differentiation advantage. And that means that you can command a price premium on a unique or perceived superior product. Think about, for example, Apple. They're really good at this. They offer computers. They offer iPhones, smartphones, tablets, etc. Now, I remember when I bought my first Mac, I want to say the cost of it was maybe 6 times what this old PC that I had bought was, but it seemed to be a better product. I don't know if it actually is or not. Perhaps I'm not technologically savvy enough to know, but I paid a price premium on a similar identical product. It's a PC. People tend to buy iPhones as opposed to other smartphones. Basically the functionality is roughly the same, but people perceive it to be better, and so therefore they're willing to pay more for it. So cost advantage can usually be objectively measured. That's more of a science side of strategy, right? Analytical side. And differentiation is more of the artistic side. Okay? It's your ability to command some sort of a price premium. Very cool. So Porter also talks about some generic strategies. And he says there's different ways of looking at strategy. Maybe let me draw them up here real quick. So you can see me. So we've got competitive scope on our y-axis and source of competitive advantage, which we just talked about. Across the top, then you've got industry-wide. And you've got single segment. But then here you've got cost leadership. And you've got differentiation here. And of course you've got focus here. Okay. So what Porter's trying to say here is, if a firm is trying to generate some sort of a competitive advantage, right, there's different ways of helping you identify whether you should be focused on cost leadership, differentiation, or focus-based. So if your competitive scope is within a single segment, remember we talked about strategic group maps, and if you look at your specific segment of the industry where you wish to compete, you can actually look at a focus-based strategy. Which would be some sort of a blend of cost leadership and differentiation, because the industrial scope where you compete is so small. Okay? Whereas if you were looking at multiple segments across an industry, hence what we talk about industry-wide, you would choose a different kind of strategy. If you want to have as your source of competitive advantage low cost, then you would look for cost leadership. In other words, charging your customers less for the same product. Whereas if you want to focus on differentiation as your competitive advantage, you would try to command a price premium on a similar or very different product to your customers. Let me give a couple of examples on this. So I would argue that, and this is kind of based on our strategic group mapping exercise in the previous module, that before Amazon bought Whole Foods really commanded a unique segment. In a way, they almost commanded a monopoly because they were a chain, and then they offered all that organic stuff. And there are not many chains that offer kind of that wholesome organic stuff besides maybe a farmer's market or those kind of things, which are not chains, which are almost exclusively local. And so because Whole Foods competed in a single segment, right, you could argue that they had the lowest cost for those products that they offered, at least compared to some extremely expensive organic local shops. And they were sufficiently different. But they didn't have to worry about that particularly either way because they almost had a monopoly within their single segment. So they would pursue a focus-based strategy. Okay? There weren't too many competitors. As long as they stick within that same segment, they can just worry about focus. Because that almost means that they do have cost leadership and differentiation because they're the only ones. Okay? So focus is kind of a blend of cost leadership and differentiation because there's no other real direct competitors. Now, if you want to look at industry-wide, think of someone like, I'll talk about food retailers again. You look at someone like Walmart, or a company like Walmart. Walmart has this amazing supply chain that keeps their costs low, and they pass those cost savings on to the customers. Their competitive advantage is cost leadership. They charge less than everyone else. Whereas a direct competitor to Walmart, at least internationally, I would argue is Carrefour. So they compete directly within the same segment, but Carrefour doesn't have cost leadership, but you get an experience at Carrefour, and the Carrefour experience is difficult to replicate. When you go to Carrefour and you want to buy wine, there's a wine merchant there who will help you pick out the wines that you want. There's a butcher who will customize and custom cut your meats. There's a fish market. It's almost like going into an old school kind of food market, but it's within a grocery store. That's the Carrefour experience, and that's why they charge so much more than all the local competitors in France and, quite frankly, everywhere else they go. You pay a premium for kind of the unique experience. But they are directly competing with Walmart. That's very different than what I, at least for the purpose of this example, that I don't really think that Whole Foods, at least before it was bought by Amazon, had any direct competition. It was kind of in its own little niche. So firms competing in the same segment would try to gain competitive advantage through cost leadership or differentiation. Okay? Or firms competing in their own unique segment would maybe focus more on a focus-based advantage. Now, in terms of competitive advantage, there also has to be a corresponding aspect of customer value creation. So we talked about cost advantage. Okay? When we look at cost advantage, or low cost, that has to translate into something that is of value to the customer. So you could do lower prices like Walmart. Right? Now Walmart could of course choose not to pass on those cost savings to customers, and then they'd be just like every other kind of every other kind of food retailer. But they choose to pass it on to customers and give customers lower prices, and that's how their competitive advantage translates into customer value. If the customer doesn't value it, they won't go for the product or service. Now, in terms of differentiation, there's two ways you can do it. You can look at offering a quote-unquote better product that commands a premium price, or something that is totally unique and gives some sort of a monopoly type experience. Either way, in terms of generation of customer value, they have to basically perceive that this quote-unquote better product or their monopoly has superior quality and therefore can command a price premium. So if we want to talk about examples, at least in food retailing, with regards to differentiation advantage, of course we could talk about better. I mentioned Carrefour already, which commands a premium price. People perceive that products they buy at Carrefour are better than certainly somewhere like Walmart. When you want to talk about unique, maybe you might think of a special family-owned grocery that you like to visit, and you only get that kind of family experience. I know where my parents live in Buffalo, there's an Italian market, and they like the fact that they can go there and the people know their name, and of course they remember their order and all that kind of stuff. So they like to go there for that. That's the only place where they go for that kind of service. And my parents like that because they perceive it to have some sort of superior quality. So that would be unique because there's only that one market in Buffalo that offers that service or that degree of customization to my parents. And of course, ideally, if you're looking at the focus segment, you are able to offer possibly a lower price and superior quality. That's ideally, though. Now, when we talked about cost leadership, there's a couple things that you should note. The key strategic elements for firms pursuing cost leadership would be things like scale-efficient plants. Okay? In other words, enjoying an economy of scale, producing thousands and thousands of nails, not one or two nails. And I already talked about economies of scale in a previous module. They also look at things like design for manufacture. Again, if you're interested in the tactical side of this, check out some of my videos on Lean Six Sigma. They want to control their overhead costs, and they also want to control research and development within the firm. They also want to try to avoid having marginal customer accounts. Okay. Now, if you wish to pursue cost leadership, you require certain kinds of resources. You need huge amounts of capital and ways to access that capital. You've got to have a competency of process engineering. That's where you get your Lean Six Sigma black belts coming in. Lots and lots of reports, lots of oversight, lots of control. Again, you're thinking about like factories and manufacturing processes. Extremely specialized job functions. You'll have people that only manage one kind of machine. They are the masters of that machine. You won't have people that are like a jack of all trades. Then of course you'll also have incentives for quantitative targets. Again, that's cost leadership. Differentiation looks at more of kind of a branding and brand advertising. Looking at design, services, and quality. And that focuses a lot on marketing skills. Looking at, of course, to some extent you'll also have to have not process engineering skills like you do in cost leadership, but product engineering skills, ways to come up with new products. Looking at creativity, great, strong product research and development. A focus on quality measurement incentives, and of course, strong cross-functional coordination within the organization. So you're going to have a lot of people who are jacks of all trades. Now, one thing that I want to kind of take you back on, we talked about this in our first module where we talked about causation and effectuation, right? Strategy as maybe more of a design, or strategy more as a process, right? So if you're looking at strategy as more of a design piece, or you're looking at more of a causation lens, or you're looking at strategy as more of a science, cost leadership is your area, because this is the really heavy quantitative analytical side of strategy. Whereas if you're looking at strategy more as a process, or you're more of an effectuation type thinker, then you're going to start looking at the differentiation side of it. Okay, this is where strategy becomes an art. Okay, it is a process. Alternative, I think I mentioned in the first lecture, this would be the Parmenides perspective, that strategy is like a rock, and if you study it enough, you can figure it out. Because there are ways you can always continuously reduce your costs within a firm to get cost leadership. Whereas differentiation is the Heraclitus perspective. That's the fire. That's what's flowing, moving, and changing. Of course, ideally, you're in the focus and you've managed to stretch between cost leadership and differentiation, but that's a little bit more unusual. So again, strategy as an art, or strategy as a science. So what we're going to talk about in the next video is looking at how competitive advantage can be eroded over time. So I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I'm looking forward to seeing you then.